Discuss the state of the economy. The latest on the GST developments is Rathin Roy, the Managing Director at the Overseas Development Institute, an independent global think tank. Rathin, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV18. Before I get to the GST tussle between the centre and the states, let me ask you about the state of the economy. Now, high-frequency indicators that the government has put forward, that the industry is reporting, do seem to suggest that September has turned out to be a better month versus August across a whole bunch of parameters, from rail freight to power consumption. The World Bank today has put out its outlook for India, saying it expects a 9.6% contraction for this fiscal. On the back of what you are seeing with high-frequency data, what's your own take on where we find ourselves?
Well, the high-frequency data doesn't tell me much. It tells me that September was better than August. And I'd probably speculate that August was better than July. So you're going to see a recovery from a state of rather severe economic contraction on a month-by-month basis. So that's not interesting. The World Bank report is uninteresting for three reasons. There's nothing in that report that tells me what I already don't know. The fact that they are forecasting real growth to be somewhat smaller than what, let's say, the Moody's has forecast, or indeed I have said will be the case, is in line with the World Bank traditionally underestimating downturns and overestimating booms. And then they revise their forecast. Note that the 9.6 is the base case forecast. I don't know what the high case forecast is. I don't know if they have a low case forecast. So I don't take the World Bank's forecast very seriously in these counts, because they keep revising them. And the essential problem that they face, like everyone, is that the model underlying these forecasts has not changed. They're still relying on pre-COVID models to model the forecast, which is why almost mechanically they're projecting a recovery in FY22. But I think the hard fact remains clear. We will not be back in nominal, in real terms, to the level of GDP that we had in FY19-20 before FY22-23. Because even if the growth rate does go up to 5.6%, given the contraction this year, we will still be below in 2 years' time where we were 2 years ago. That's the hard point. We will be a smaller economy.
Yes, it will take at least 2 years in your estimation to return back to pre-COVID levels. But Rathin, World Bank aside, let me also ask you now about the MPC. We've got the new MPC members joining, and the first MPC meeting of this reconstituted MPC tomorrow. The CNBC TV18 poll expects a status quo on rates. What's your own sense?
I don't care. Because I've not seen any analytical reasoning as to how the Reserve Bank of India, and it's not fair to this NPC, they have the right to give me that, and I should look for that tomorrow. But in this kind of situation, you have to tell me how you expect the economy to pan out over the next year, year and a half, clearly and analytically, and then give me an analytical framework of what you're going to do with interest rates. If they do hold rates, I'm very relieved, because we're entering what we call a J curve, where further reductions in interest rates at some point will lose their potency to do anything to increase economic activity, because the theory by which that transmission happens, in my view, is no longer valid. But it's a new MPC, so let us see whether they can provide us with somewhat better analytical rationale that I've been seeing since COVID started.
Okay, then let's get straight to the GST tussle. And what we've now seen is 3 points of view being made by the centre. 2 borrowing options being presented to states. The option 1 has been revised upwards. Option 2 has been revised downwards. And now there is a third aspect to this, where the centre believes that there is no need for a vote on this issue, that this is not even a matter under the jurisdiction of the GST Council. So what do you expect on the 12th of October, Rathin? But more importantly, do you believe that it makes economic sense for the centre to borrow, or do you believe that it is fair for the centre to ask the states to borrow?
It makes economic sense for the centre to borrow, simply because if the states borrow, you have to ask who holds the borrowing. And the answer is the borrowing is held largely by financial institutions, right? A majority of which are owned by the central government. So the interest on that borrowing accrues as increased revenues to institutions owned by the central government. So in that sense, the central level public sector makes money when states follow. There's a moral hazard problem here. I've been pointing this out repeatedly, which the center has decided not to take into account. That is one. Second, the issue of whether they raise or tweak borrowing limits points to me simply to, again, lack of competence. If it was the case that a 2-month deferment to the next financial year is normal practice, then why was that number not announced when the first number was announced? The center is basically correcting for what? Its loss of memory? I do not understand. That is, I think, the crux of the problem, that every time the center undertakes these exercises incompetently. So what's the center saying now? As I read it, they're saying, oh, the first time we offered you this, we forgot that 2 months liability is carried over. So now we are deducting it in option 2. What does that tell you about the central government? It's not rocket science, if you know that already. Why did you not think of it the first time? Why are you now saying it the second time? So this loss of confidence in the ability of the center to be able to manage national affairs, I think also leads to a narrowing scope for the plea that we are in difficult times and so we have to share the pain, and how can we best do it? That GST compensation with the best will in the world, while we acknowledge that it is something that is due to the states, is not going to be of the order of magnitude that we could give. And therefore, what we are going to do is borrow and give it to you, but that will mean offsets in later years. That would be one nice bargain to do. The center has chosen not to do that. The center equally has not chosen to say that we can review these things when the report of the 15th Finance Commission comes up. And the states know that there is a likelihood, I'm not saying it's going to happen, I'm not privy to these things. There's a likelihood that, citing various grounds, the vertical devolution might be reduced. And the states have no idea what the new horizontal devolution formula will be. And the way these things go, I doubt that that report will be made public and therefore available to the states for a long time to come, at least until the next parliamentary session. So this creates an atmosphere of uncertainty, where the center can do two things. It can demonstrate competence, which is patently not doing, and this is the latest example of that, or it can provide reassurance, which it is not willing to do. In those circumstances, relationships are going to be attritive, and ultimately the center will have its way, I think, and the states may be forced to borrow, but that is an extremely depressing prospect for intergovernmental fiscal relations going forward.
You know, as you point out that at this point in time, the center is unwilling to relent. 10 states, or at least 11 states at this point in time, are saying that we would like a vote on this issue. But if it doesn't come to a vote, which is the center's argument using the Attorney General's opinion that this is not a matter that can be voted on within the GST Council, and if states are left with no choice but to opt for option 1 or option 2, what will be the impact on states? Because I know that this is a vulnerability that you have been concerned about.
It is not the Attorney General's place to argue whether something should or should not be voted on. Or let me put it better. Notwithstanding the Attorney General's opinion on the voting issue, there is nothing that prevents the centre in calling for a vote in the GST Council. Right? Whether it is legally bound to do so or not is one thing. Whether in the spirit of cooperative federalism they wish to do so or not is quite another. So again, this smacks of bureaucratic interpretation and weak political input. This is what a bureaucrat would say. This is not what a politician would say. And I'm seeing this repeatedly with the Ministry of Finance. There is extremely weak political input. Bureaucratic excuses are trotted out time and again, such as this 2-month business. And yes, the 2-month business need not be voted on. Absolutely. That's normal practice. And that's fine. If that is what the Attorney General was referring to. But on the principle of whether we should have these options and there should be a third option, nothing prevents one of the parties in the council from organizing a discussion on the subject and then voluntarily conceding to a vote. A bureaucrat might object, a politician would not. And where's the political input then? The GST Council is not a council of bureaucrats. It is not a council that is opened by the Revenue Secretary and declared closed by the Revenue Secretary. It is a council of finance ministers and the finance minister of the Government of India, with the bureaucracy of the Government of India acting in conjunction with others, essentially in a secretarial and advisory function. And therefore, decisions that are taken must be taken politically, and I do not see that happening, and that is what worries. There is no political capital being invested in this process by the central government, and that's extremely unfortunate.
Okay, so let me end then by asking you, Rathin, because, you talked about how this already fraught situation between the centre and the states is likely to worsen if the 15th Finance Commission, when it submits its report at the end of October, does in fact decide to reduce the devolution. In my last conversation with the chairman of the Finance Commission, N.K. Singh, he said that it was an option to recalibrate. He wouldn't say openly whether they would lower it, but he did say that the states wanted the number to be 50% and the centre had argued that it should be lower than the current 42%. If there were to be a cut, what will it mean for states?
Well, I imagine the Prime Minister would be very disappointed because in his capacity as Chief Minister of Gujarat, he had actually argued for the 50%. And I would share his disappointment. So I do hope that there will be no such recalibration and that in fact a recognition will be made that while we have shrunken fiscal space, the burden of dealing with the corona problem, including the lack of a GST compensation cess, but not just confined to that, the increased development and crisis fighting responsibilities of the state government are of an order of magnitude, which merits, in my view, an increase in the vertical devolution. Now, that can be calibrated across 5 years or not, I don't know. But I certainly I have a great respect for the Finance Commission and its members. I think they will be fair. And I think the fair thing to do, in my view, would be to rule out any such calibration, which results in a reduction of the vertical devolution. But of course, that's the Finance Commission's prerogative, and so I'd best save my comments from when they actually do it. It would be unfair to prejudge.
Absolutely. We will have to wait till the end of October for the Finance Commission to present its report. This is based on our conversations with members of the Finance Commission, and of course this...
You will have to wait much longer than that, because you will have to wait till Parliament, the report is placed before Parliament. And if the government, I think very unfortunate, I want to use this to say this, that I think the report should be placed in Parliament as soon as possible. The bureaucratic temptation to wait until the budget session must be resisted, because the trust deficit must not be allowed to grow, and therefore it's best to have an honest conversation on this report. Because remember, the states will not see the report till it is tabled to the Lok Sabha. And therefore, early tabling is also something the centre can do to reduce the trust deficit between the centre and the states, and many states.
Well, let's see whether that is what indeed happens. Rathin Roy, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here to talk about a whole host of issues, from the tussle over the GST compensation shortfall to, of course, the state of the economy. We'll take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment.